are doing the impossible for the ungrateful. Good evening. We, the unwilling, led by the unknowing, are doing the impossible for the ungrateful. We have done so much for so long with so little. We are now qualified to do anything with nothing.
Point, the bold efforts the present bank has made to control the government are but premonitions of the fate that awaits the American people should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it. Unfortunately, his message was short-lived, and the international bankers succeeded to install another central bank in 1913, the Federal Reserve. And as long as this institution exists, perpetual debt is guaranteed.
Ian.
Now, so far we have discussed the reality that money is created out of debt through loans. These loans are based on a bank's reserves, and reserves are derived from deposits. And through this fractional reserve system, any one deposit can create 9 times its original value.
Can you bring me my phone on the sofa?
The existing money supply, raising prices in society.
Please?
All this money is created out of debt and circulated randomly through commerce. People become detached from their original debt, and a disequilibrium exists where people are forced to compete for labor in order to pool enough money out of the money supply to cover their costs of living. As dysfunctional and backwards as all of this might seem, there is still one thing we have omitted from this equation. And it is this element of the structure which reveals the truly fraudulent nature of the system itself. The application of interest. When the government borrows money from the Fed, or when a person borrows money from a bank, it almost always has to be paid back with accrued interest. In other words, almost every single dollar that exists must be eventually returned to a bank with interest paid as well. But if all money is borrowed from the central bank and is expanded by commercial banks through loans, only what would be referred to as the principal is being created in the money supply. So then, where is the money to cover all of the interest that is charged? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. The ramifications of this are staggering, for the amount of money owed back to the banks will always exceed the amount of money that is available in circulation. This is why inflation is a constant in the economy, for new money is always needed to help cover the perpetual deficit built into the system, caused by the need to pay the interest. What this also means is that mathematically, defaults and bankruptcy are literally built into the system, and there will always be poor pockets of society that get the short end of the stick. An analogy would be a game of musical chairs, for once the music stops, somebody is left out to dry. And that's the point. It invariably transfers true wealth from the individual to the banks. For if you are unable to pay for your mortgage, they will take your property. This is particularly enraging when you realize that not only is such a default inevitable due to the fractional reserve practice, but also because of the fact that the money that the bank loaned to you didn't even legally exist in the first place. In 1969, there was a Minnesota court case involving a man named Jerome Daley, who was challenging the foreclosure of his home by the bank, which provided the loan to purchase it. His argument was that the mortgage contract required both parties, being he and the bank, each put up a legitimate form of property for the exchange. In legal language, this is called consideration. Mr. Daley explained that the money was, in fact, not the property of the bank, for it was created out of nothing as soon as the loan agreement was signed. Remember what modern money mechanics stated about loans? What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes in exchange for credits. Reserves are unchanged by the loan transactions, but deposits assets. The bank is simply inventing it, putting up nothing of its own, except for a theoretical liability on paper. As the court case progressed, the bank's president, Mr. Morgan, took the stand, and in the judge's personal memorandum, he recalled that The plaintiff, bank's president, admitted that, in combination with the Federal Reserve Bank, did create the money and credit upon its books by bookkeeping entry. The money and credit first came into existence when they created it. Mr. Morgan admitted that no United States law or statute existed which gave him the right to do this. A lawful consideration must exist and be tendered to support the note. The jury found that there was no lawful consideration, and I agree. He also poetically added, only God can create something of value out of nothing. And upon this revelation, the court rejected the bank's claim for foreclosure, and Daley kept his home. The implications of this court decision are immense. For every time you borrow money from a bank, whether it is a mortgage loan or a credit card charge, the money given to you is not only counterfeit, it is an illegitimate form of consideration, and hence voids the contract to repay, for the bank never had the money as property to begin with. Unfortunately, such legal realizations are suppressed and ignored, and the game of perpetual wealth transfer and perpetual debt continues. And this brings us to the ultimate question: why? During the American Civil War, President Lincoln bypassed the high-interest loans offered by the European banks and decided to do what the Founding Fathers advocated, which was to create an independent and inherently debt-free currency. It was called the greenback. Shortly after this measure was taken, an internal document circulated between private British and American banking interests stated, "Slavery is but the owning of labor and carries with it the care of laborers, while the European plan is that capital shall control labor by controlling wages. This can be done by controlling the money. It will not do to allow the greenback, as we cannot control that." The fractional reserve policy perpetrated by the Federal Reserve, which has spread in practice to the great majority of banks in the world, is, in fact, a system of modern slavery. Think about it. Money is created out of debt. And what do people do when they are in debt? They submit to employment to pay it off. But if money can only be created out of loans, how can society ever be debt-free? It can't. And that's the point. And it is the fear of losing assets coupled with the struggle to keep up with the perpetual debt and inflation inherent in the system, compounded by the inescapable scarcity within the money supply itself, created by the interest that can never be repaid, that keeps the wage slave in line, running on the hamster wheel with millions of others, in effect powering an empire that truly benefits only the elite at the top of the pyramid. For, at the end of the day, who are you really working for? The banks. Money is created in a bank and invariably ends up in a bank. They are the true masters, along with the corporations and governments they support. Physical slavery requires people to be housed and fed. Economic slavery requires people to feed and house themselves. It is one of the most ingenious scams for social manipulation ever created, and at its core, it is an invisible war against the population. Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave societies, and interest is its prime ammunition. And as the majority walks around oblivious to this reality, the banks, in collusion with governments and corporations, continue to perfect and expand their tactics of economic warfare, spawning new bases, such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund.
Calling Up Justice is a collective of cultural producers, tech workers, artists, and social justice activists dedicated to promoting justice through various mediums, including online platforms, stage performance.
For a moment, we had the...
Let me see if I understand your position. Basically, would you say that it's wrong for the citizens to initiate physical force against other citizens like an armed robber does?
unless we permit
But
that
it's
by
okay
law.
for the government to do so.
Because the government has been authorized by the people.
Okay, but if the government authorized armed robbers to do it, it would be okay?
If the government is that foolish to do so, I don't know what kind of country that would be, but that's legal, and if it's constitutional, so be it.
But would you think that that's moral for individuals to be
Me?
empowered to,
Oh, no.
to rob their fellow citizens?
I don't think so.
So that would be wrong. So
I would
basically,
think so. It's wrong.
okay, so you think that it's wrong for a citizen, an individual citizen, to initiate force against others to deprive them of their property, but it's okay for the government to do it if the
It's not-
majority has
It
elected
is
that government.
okay. It is okay if the government is authorized to do so. The government is authorized to levy taxes, and the authorization comes from the people through their representatives. Now, if the people through their representatives say no taxes, everything be charity, so be it.
Okay, so you would say that all legitimate governmental power is derived from the people?
That's the way it is in our Constitution.
Do the individual citizens have the right to initiate physical force against other citizens that have not initiated or threatened to initiate force against anybody and haven't violated anybody's property rights?
They cannot do that because they are not authorized to do so under the
Right.
law.
So individual citizens don't have that right. If they don't have the right to initiate physical force against other citizens, could they have properly delegated that right to the government?
Oh, yes, they do so right now.
Can you properly delegate a right that you do not have?
You can give the right to their representatives to make laws that will authorize or make prohibitive certain activities.
So you think that you can delegate a right that you don't have? You can properly delegate a right that you don't have?
You cannot tax your neighbor, but you can authorize me as your senator to vote for a program that will tax your neighbor.
Okay, so if you say that a person can properly delegate a right that they do not have, is that correct?
Under your distorted argument, yes.
Okay, well, I don't have the right to
Rather
use your home in Hawaii, right? But could I delegate that right to some of my friends?
No way.
Right, so you really can't delegate a right that you don't have. You have to have the right in order to delegate
We're
it,
talking
right?
about the government here.
Right, but you agreed that the individuals do not have
But
the right.
you can authorize the government
Right, but did you
to take
agree?
over my residence.
Okay, but did you agree that the individuals did not have the right to initiate force against the other individuals? They don't have that right.
No.
So
Although some people think they do.
then they could not have delegated that right if they didn't have it.
They would delegate authority to us, their representatives, to make laws in their best interest.
So even if they don't have the right, they can delegate it to somebody else.
To make laws that might
Right.
do that.
So then you think that you can actually delegate a right that you do not have.
I don't know why you use this tortured route.
Well,
You know what I'm saying.
I'm trying. This is interesting to me how it is that the agent can have more power than the principal. If the principals are the people and the source comes from the people, and the individuals do not have the right to initiate force against others, I would
As
suppose.
individuals.
Well, if they get together, then all of a sudden they have the right.
If they authorize the government to do so, yes.
Well, if
If they
nobody.
authorize the government to enter into a war and kill people, that's a right.
Well, where does this right come from if it doesn't come from the people?
The people through the Constitution.
Well, the Constitution was made by the people, right?
That's right.
So then, the people are the source of all legitimate power. So if the people did not have the right to initiate physical force against anybody, then
You know, I
the
don't know
government
where, I
cannot
don't know where
have.
we're getting. You know,
Well, it seems like there's a contradiction there as far as if you say that all legitimate governmental power is derived from the people. You agree that the individual citizens do not have the right to initiate force against other citizens, then it would seem clear that they cannot delegate that right to the
why don't we
government.
just leave it this way? We disagree.
Start a fight in one sentence or less.
A lot of you straight parents out there are so homophobic, internally and externally, that if your child ever came out to you as gay, you would be upset because you disgustingly believe that somebody groomed your child before you could.
Fuck you mean as of today it's not illegal in Florida for homeless people to sleep or camp on the sidewalks, parks, or in public premises? Where the fuck is they supposed to go? Nigga, they're homeless.
Listen up, nephew. You live in the state of Florida. You have private prisons. Just pulling one out of a hat. Graceville Correctional Facility over there in Jackson County, Florida. It's been owned and operated since 2007 by CCA GEO. GEO operates a prison here in Oklahoma. And MTC under contract with the Florida Department of the Corrections. They're under contract. Most of the private prison contracts in America require states to keep at least 90% of prison beds filled or pay a penalty to the private for-profit corporations. So if these guys don't get enough inmates in their prison, they get to charge these guys our money. Yes, you heard me correctly. If the corporations don't get us in their prisons, they're still going to take money from us, the people, the taxpayer, Department of Corrections. That's an executive branch. Here, let's ask the ACLU. From the moment they enter the prison gates, incarcerated people lose the right to refuse to work. This is because the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which protects against slavery and involuntary servitude, explicitly excludes from its reach those held in confinement due to a criminal conviction. These for-profit prisons, they force you to work. So you're going to work for the corporations one way or the other. You're either going to get your degree from them and then go work for them, or if you're poor, you're going to go to prison and then work for them for free. And remember, kids, you have absolutely no other choice than to vote, vote, vote. You have free will.
It's cold as shit, so please forgive the wayward hoodie debauchery I got going on over here. But I just wanted to say that it is disgusting to see many of you, most of you, almost all of you with major platforms, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 followers and up, 1,000 views per video and up. There's a distinct lack of perpetuation and promotion of solutions. I don't know if you're doing this on behalf of your fan base because you know they're a bunch of clowns who are really anti, and you know they'll abandon your ship if you start insinuating you have something constructive to fucking contribute. And it's sick. It's sick. The people with the most ability to get words out, to get concepts, the kind of exposure they deserve, y'all are too busy arguing, debating, setting yourselves up for ops-only spaces. We don't want to be an echo chamber. There's a difference between providing, generating, and engaging in solutions. Echo chamber, yelling to the other members of the echo chamber to agree with you. In solutions and in the spectrum, in the field of solutions, there is no debate. There is no arguing. There's no votes. There's just implementation of logical, logistical solutions. And so I'm not going to mention any names because you know who you are, but it's so sad. It's so sad. I was just on live, and the moment that I brought up a solution that we have, the whole panel dropped. The whole live ended. And that person immediately came back up and continued talking about nothing, like I had never brought up a solution at all. So y'all go ahead and have the days and the country and the lifestyle and the tyranny that you so viciously. If you are tired and done with people playing in your face, gaslighting you, lying to you, lying to themselves, you, please go to longseas.com. Because not only do we have the problems listed in detail, but we also present the solutions in detail, free of the noise of the popular masses and their bullshit. So if you're done playing games with supremacists, if you're done arguing with supremacists, trying to convince supremacists, trying to have equitable discussions and conversations with supremacists, just because you share values and ideas on XYZ, if they are perpetuating harm by advocating our support or service to or legitimization of supremacy and supremacist institutions like voting, we gotta leave them behind. And you can start leaving them behind by coming over to the side of solutions-focused activism any old day of the week for free. So why don't you go ahead and check out that website, evolvingseeds.com. Stop playing in your own face.
Some of y'all attention span is telling on you. You have a long attention span for stupidity, foolishness, drama, mess. I mean, you can listen forever and people argue and yell and scream, even though you can't make out what's going on to save your life. But your attention span for stupidity is endless. And the moment you come around someone that can clarify, explain, resolve, or provide solutions to just about any situation, especially being that most of y'all are inside of simple issues that you personally made complex. If the person that can clarify or that can resolve the issue, you want them to be quieter, to go faster, or to say things shorter, and you want the drama and the idiocy to be endless, I think you're on the wrong side of TikTok with this side over here. Scroll a little bit more, go to a different live, and you'll probably find the mess. But don't think that we're going to stop being us for you.
I'm so tired of them.
I'm so tired of providing detailed solutions to the world's many unnecessary fucking problems while using broken, outdated, irrelevant, obsolete social networks to try to inform people of the many solutions that we have, and then seeing people have profound moments of enlightenment and awareness to some of the most rudimentary, basic, almost irrelevant, not irrelevant, but irrelevant. Like, we got a whole ass boot on our neck, and I know the diets of the various indigenous peoples of the world is very important, riveting information. But literally, we have solutions to 90%, 98% of the problems we have on this planet. And when we say something, no one listens, and then everybody bitches and complains about the shit. We are screaming to the mountains and to the rooftops and to the cities and to the city council members, to the everybody, and nobody gives a fuck. It's really fucking frustrating. It's almost like we don't live on the same fucking planet. I get it. They lied. They didn't teach us a bunch of stuff. They withheld information. All of that is very relevant. But there are solutions to the pressing problems we have. Some things take priority, and yet people will post these aha moment fucking videos as if the aha that they're having isn't some of the most basic shit you ever heard in your life. And even they themselves admit that they're just not hearing it. It's like, oh my God, I just heard, I just realized it. What day did you realize it? And they have 5,000 fucking comments, 10,000 views, 20,000 likes. Like, this shit makes sense. Similarly, everybody's complaining about how things are so bad, and yet spending for the holiday season is up 22%. Everybody looks like they're living their best life, while simultaneously having these little Joe Rogan style, Joe Rogan level aha moments. Maybe we're genetically engineered. Maybe the shape of the planet's a trapezoid. Maybe her body count doesn't matter.
A number of years ago, the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, produced a document entitled Modern Money Mechanics. This publication detailed the institutionalized practice of money creation as utilized by the Federal Reserve and the web of global commercial banks it supports. On the opening page, the document states its objective. The purpose of this booklet is to describe the basic process of money creation in a fractional reserve banking system. It then proceeds to describe this fractional reserve process through various banking terminology, a translation of which goes something like this. The United States government decides it needs some money, so it calls up the Federal Reserve and requests, say, $10 billion. The Fed replies, saying, sure, we'll buy $10 billion in government bonds from you. So the government takes some pieces of paper, paints some official-looking designs on them, and calls them treasury bonds. Then it puts a value on these bonds to the sum of $10 billion and sends them over to the Fed. In turn, the people at the Fed draw up a bunch of impressive pieces of paper themselves, only this time calling them Federal Reserve notes, also designating a value of $10 billion to the Fed. The Fed then takes these notes and trades them for the bonds. Once this exchange is complete, the government then takes the $10 billion in Federal Reserve notes and deposits it into a bank account. And upon this deposit, the paper notes officially become legal tender money, adding $10 billion to the U.S. money supply. And there it is. $10 billion in new money has been created. Of course, this example is a generalization, for, in reality, this transaction would occur electronically, with no paper used at all. In fact, only 3% of the U.S. money supply exists in physical currency. The other 97% essentially exists in computers alone. Now, government bonds are, by design, instruments of debt. And when the Fed purchases these bonds, with money it essentially created out of thin air, the government is actually promising to pay back that money to the Fed. In other words, the money was created out of debt. This mind-numbing paradox of how money or value can be created out of debt or a liability will become more clear as we further this exercise. So the exchange has been made, and now $10 billion sits in a commercial bank account. Here's where it gets really interesting. For as based on the fractional reserve practice, that $10 billion deposit instantly becomes part of the bank's reserves, just as all deposits do. And regarding reserve requirements, as stated in Modern Money Mechanics, a bank must maintain legally required reserves equal to a prescribed percentage of its deposits. It then quantifies this by stating, under current regulations, the reserve requirement against most transaction accounts is 10%. This means that with a $10 billion deposit, 10% or $1 billion is held as the required reserve, while the other $9 billion is considered an excessive reserve and can be used as the basis for new loans. Now, it is logical to assume that this $9 billion is literally coming out of the existing $10 billion deposit. However, this is actually not the case. What really happens is that the $9 billion is simply created out of thin air on top of the existing $10 billion deposit. This is how the money supply is expanded. As stated in Modern Money Mechanics, of course they, the banks, do not really pay out loans from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes, loan contracts, in exchange for credits, money, to the borrower's transaction accounts. In other words, the $9 billion can be created out of nothing simply because there is a demand for such a loan and that there is a $10 billion deposit to satisfy the reserve requirements. Now, let's assume that somebody walks into this bank and borrows the newly available $9 billion. They will then most likely take that money and deposit it into their own bank account. The process then repeats, for that deposit becomes part of the bank's reserves. 10% is isolated, and in turn 90% of the $9 billion, or $8.1 billion, is now available as newly created money for more loans. And of course, that 8.1 can be loaned out and redeposited, creating an additional $7.2 billion to 6.5 billion to 5.9 billion, etc. This deposit money creation loan cycle can technically go on to infinity. The average mathematical result is that about $90 billion can be created on top of the original 10 billion. In other words, for every deposit that ever occurs in the banking system, about 9 times that amount can be created out of thin air.
Money jitters. Ask the obliging Bank of America for a jar of soothing instant money, MONEY, in the form of a convenient personal loan.
So, now that we understand how money is created by this fractional reserve banking system, a logical yet elusive question might come to mind. What is actually giving this newly created money value? The answer? The money that already exists. The new money essentially steals value from the existing money supply. For the total pool of money is being increased irrespective to demand for goods and services. And as supply and demand finds equilibrium, prices rise, diminishing the purchasing power of each individual dollar. This is generally referred to as inflation, and inflation is essentially a hidden tax on the public.
What is the advice that you generally get? And that is inflate the currency. They don't say debase the currency. They don't say devalue the currency. They don't say cheat the people who are saved. They say lower the interest rates. The real deception is when we distort the value of money. When we create money out of thin air, we have no savings, and yet there's so-called capital. So my question boils down to this. How in the world can we expect to solve the problems of inflation, that is, the increase in the supply of money, with more inflation?
Of course, it can't. The fractional reserve system of monetary expansion is inherently inflationary. For the act of expanding the money supply without there being a proportional expansion of goods and services in the economy will always debase a currency. In fact, a quick glance at the historical values of the US dollar versus the money supply reflects this point definitively, for the inverse relationship is obvious. $1 in 1913 required $21.60 in 2007 to match value. That is a 96% devaluation since the Federal Reserve came into existence. Now, if this reality of inherent and perpetual inflation seems absurd and economically self-defeating, hold that thought, for absurdity is an understatement in regard to how our financial system really operates. For in our financial system, money is debt, and debt is money. Here is a chart of the U.S. money supply from 1950 to 2006. Here is a chart of the U.S. national debt for the same period. How interesting it is that the trends are virtually the same. For the more money there is, the more debt there is. The more debt there is, the more money there is. To put it a different way, every single dollar in your wallet is owed to somebody by somebody. For remember, the only way the money can come into existence is from loans. Therefore, if everyone in the country were able to pay off all debts, including the government, there would not be $1 in circulation. In fact, the last time in American history the national debt was completely paid off was in 1835 after President Andrew Jackson shut down the central bank that preceded the Federal Reserve. In fact, Jackson's entire political platform essentially revolved around his commitment to shut down the central bank, stating at one point, "The bold efforts the present bank has made to control the government are but premonitions of the fate that awaits the American people should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it." Unfortunately, his message was short-lived, and the international bankers succeeded to install another central bank in 1913, the Federal Reserve. And as long as this institution exists, perpetual debt is guaranteed. Now, so far we have discussed the reality that money is created out of debt through loans. These loans are based on a bank's reserves, and reserves are derived from deposits. And through this fractional reserve system, any one deposit can create 9 times its original value, in turn debasing the existing money supply, raising prices in society. And since all this money is created out of debt and circulated randomly through commerce, people become detached from their original debt, and a disequilibrium exists where people are forced to compete for labor in order to pull enough money out of the money supply to cover their costs of living. As dysfunctional and backwards as all of this might seem, there is still one thing we have omitted from this equation. And it is this element of the structure which reveals the truly fraudulent nature of the system itself. The application of interest. When the government borrows money from the Fed, or when a person borrows money from a bank, it almost always has to be paid back with accrued interest. In other words, almost every single dollar that exists must be eventually returned to a bank with interest paid as well. But if all money is borrowed from the central bank and is expanded by commercial banks through loans, only what would be referred to as the principal is being created in the money supply. So then, where is the money to cover all of the interest that is charged? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. The ramifications of this are staggering, for the amount of money owed back to the banks will always exceed the amount of money that is available in circulation. This is why inflation is a constant in the economy, for new money is always needed to help cover the perpetual deficit built into the system, caused by the need to pay the interest. What this also means is that mathematically, defaults and bankruptcy are literally built into the system, and there will always be poor pockets of society that get the short end of the stick. An analogy would be a game of musical chairs, for once the music stops, somebody is left out to dry. And that's the point. It invariably transfers true wealth from the individual to the banks. For if you are unable to pay for your mortgage, they will take your property. This is particularly enraging when you realize that not only is such a default inevitable due to the fractional reserve practice, but also because of the fact that the money that the bank loaned to you didn't even legally exist in the first place. In 1969, there was a Minnesota court case involving a man named Jerome Daly, who was challenging the foreclosure of his home by the bank which provided the loan to purchase it. His argument was that the mortgage contract required both parties, being he and the bank, each put up a legitimate form of property for the exchange. In legal language, this is called consideration.
And here, Your Majesty, we have an infant phenomenon, a remarkable child of 10. He's quite a historian, editor of our school magazine. Very interesting. This, Your Majesty, is Rupert, our young editor. How do you do, Rupert? How do you do? Sit down. And what's that you're reading?
Karl Marx.
Surely you're not a communist.
Do I have to be a communist to read Karl Marx?
Rupert. That's a valid answer. Well, if you're not a communist, what are you?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I dislike all forms of government.
Some.
And I don't like the word rule.
Well, if we don't like the word rule, let's call it leadership.
Leadership in government is political power, and political power is an official form of antagonizing the people.
What magazine did you say he edits? A commentary on current events. Pardon me. But, my dear young man, politics aren't necessary.
Politics are rules imposed upon the people.
In this country, rules are not imposed. They are the wish of all free citizens.
Travel around a bit, then you'll see how free they are.
Yes, but you didn't let me finish.
They have every man in a straitjacket, and without a passport, he can't move a toe.
But if you'll allow me to...
In a free world, they violate the natural rights of every citizen.
But you don't let me fully...
They have become the weapons of political despots.
Yes, but may
And if you don't think as they think, you're deprived of your passport.
Will you allow me
to leave a country is like breaking out of jail.
Yes,
and to enter a country is like going through the eye of a needle.
But
am I free to travel?
Of course. course you're free to travel.
Only with the passport.
Will you allow me to say something?
Only with the passport. Do animals need passports?
Have you finished?
It's incongruous that in this atomic age of speed, we are shut in and shut out by passports.
If you'll shut up and let somebody else talk.
And free speech, does that exist?
No, you've got it all.
And free enterprise.
We were talking of passports.
Today it's all monopoly.
All right. Now will you...
Can I go into the automobile business and compete with the auto trust?
If I can get in a word.
Not a chance. Can I go into the grocery business and compete with the chain stores?
Will you shut up?
Not a chance. Monopoly is the menace of free enterprise. As I look back 60 years ago.
Where were you 60 years ago?
He was a glint in his great-grandfather's eye.
Very well now. Have you finished? Now let me say something. Let me tell you how wrong you are. In the first place. In the first place. Now I've forgotten what I wanted to say.
And the atomic bomb.
Ah.
It's a crime that when the world cries for atomic energy, you want to make atomic bombs.
Me? I'm against atomic bombs.
You want to wipe out civilization, destroy all life on this planet. You don't think you're living in the
I lost my throne because I didn't want atomic bombs.
You and your kind think that atomic bombs can solve your problem.
Listen, you little rat.
Today, man has too much power. The Roman Empire collapsed with the assassination of Caesar. And why? Because of too much power. Feudalism blew up with the French Revolution. And why? Because of too much power. And today, the whole world will blow up. And why?
Because of too much power.
The monopoly of power is a menace to freedom. It degrades and victimizes every individual. And where is the individual?
I don't know.
Lost in terror because he's made to hate instead of love. If civilization is to survive, we must combat power until the dignity and peace of man are restored.
That's sad, Ian.
Evolving Seeds. Cultivating change, one action at a time.
Wash your hands.
Are you ready to grow a better future? Visit evolvingseeds.com, your hub for meaningful activism and impactful change. At Evolving Seeds, we empower individuals to make a difference, connect you with grassroots movements, share resources to inspire sustainable action. From climate justice to social equality, we're here to nurture ideas that blossom into real-world change. Whether you're planting the first seed of awareness or tending a thriving community, Evolving Seeds is here to help your activism flourish. Join the movement. Sow the seeds of change today. Visit evolvingseeds.com. www.evolvingseeds.com to get started. Benefits of evolvingseeds.com. 1. Access to actionable resources, guides, toolkits, and step-by-step instructions to support your activism. 2. Community connection. Engage with like-minded individuals and collaborate on meaningful projects. 3. Diverse causes. Explore topics like climate change, social justice, equality, and more to find your passion. 4. Educational content. Learn about pressing global issues and how to create positive change. 5. Empowerment tools. Practical advice and strategies to amplify your voice and make an impact. 6. Event listings. Discover workshops, protests, and gatherings happening near you or online. 7. Inspiration for new ideas. Stories of success and innovative activism to fuel your own initiatives. 8. Sustainability tips. Practical ways to live a more eco-friendly life while supporting systemic change. 9. Volunteer opportunities. Find organizations and projects in need of your time and skills. 10. A platform for your voice. Share your own projects, ideas, and initiatives with a supportive audience. EvolvingSeeds.com is a one-stop destination for anyone who wants to make the world a better place. Activism University, your path to becoming a change maker. Ready to turn your passion into purpose? Enroll in Activism University exclusively on evolvingseeds.com, evolvingseeds.com. What is Activism University? A comprehensive online learning platform designed to empower individuals with the knowledge, skills, and strategies needed to create meaningful change in their communities and beyond. Why choose Activism University? Expert-led courses, Learn from experienced activists and thought leaders. Flexible learning. Study at your own pace from anywhere in the world. Real-world skills. Gain practical tools for organizing, campaigning, and creating impact. Diverse topics. Explore subjects like climate justice, advocacy, grassroots organizing, and more. Certification. Earn credentials to showcase your commitment to social change. Courses available. Advocacy 101, making your voice heard. Organizing grassroots movements. Digital activism in the modern age. Climate action strategies. Social justice leadership. Take the first step toward making a difference. Visit evolvingseeds.com Activism University. Digital at www.evolvingseeds.com/Activism University and enroll today. Together, let's build a better world.
Become an Academy of Ideas supporting member and access over 88 videos exclusive to members. Sign up for our membership program by visiting academyofideas.com/members. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and destroys itself. It is in vain to say democracy is less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, or less avaricious than aristocracy or monarchy. It is not true, in fact, and nowhere appears in history. Those passions are the same in all men under all forms of simple government, and when unchecked, produce the same effects of fraud, violence, and cruelty. In every age, there is a set of beliefs that are elevated to a sacred status, and questioning them is deemed heretical. For centuries, it was the dogmas of Christianity that possessed this status. Today, it is the dogma of the democratic state. Democracy, as currently practiced, is the greatest form of government, and anyone who denies this commits blasphemy, or so we are taught. But just as much of the Christian dogma was a veil to protect the power of the church, the same can be said about democracy. Democracy, with its political campaigns, elections, and the illusion of rule, is a veil behind which politicians and bureaucrats parasitically enrich themselves, while imposing their corruptive vision of society on the rest of us. In this video, we explore some of the fatal flaws of modern democracy and explain how instead of promoting social flourishing, it has given rise to a form of soft totalitarianism. Conceived as the foundation of liberty, modern democracy paves the way for tyranny. Born for the purpose of standing as a bulwark against power, it ends by providing power with the finest soil it has ever had in which to spread itself over the social field. There are many institutions that are necessary for a free and prosperous society. These include free markets, the division of labor, a rule of law that promotes order and trust, strong families, sound money, a school system that educates instead of indoctrinates, and a robust media that pursues the truth instead of spreading propaganda. If a democracy preserves these institutions, then one can claim that it is a form of political organization conducive to social harmony. But if it continually produces governments that destroy these institutions, then the value of democracy must be questioned. Across the globe, the governments of most democracies are doing the latter. From the family unit to schooling, the media, free markets, sound money, or the rule of law, politicians and bureaucrats are actively destroying, or at least severely corrupting, these institutions. Why is this? What are the flaws of modern-day democracies that are leading it to manifest such corrupt governments? To answer this question, we must distinguish between two types of democracy: direct democracy and indirect democracy. A direct democracy involves citizens casting votes on specific issues, usually by means of a referendum. In a direct democracy, majority rules. Whether one views this organization in a positive or negative light will usually depend on if one belongs to the majority or minority. Those in the majority tend to believe that direct democracy is a good system, as it leads to the satisfaction of their wants, while those in the minority often feel that direct democracy is nothing more than a tyranny of the masses. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what they are going to have for lunch, Benjamin Franklin famously remarked. while the 19th century British politician Oberon Herbert had this to say concerning the morality of a direct democracy. 5 men are in a room. Because 3 men take one view and 2 another, have the 3 men any moral right to enforce their view on the other 2 men? What magical power comes over the 3 men that because they are 1 more in number than the 2 men, therefore they suddenly become possessors of the minds and bodies of these others? As long as they were 2 to 2, so long we supposed each man remained master of his own mind and body. But from the moment that another man, acting heaven only knows from what motives, has joined himself to one party or the other, that party has become straightway possessed of the souls and bodies of the other party. Was there ever such a degrading and indefensible superstition? A tyranny of the masses, however, is no most serious threat facing the West, as we live in indirect democracies which render most people politically impotent, and the power of the masses relatively negligible. In an indirect or representational democracy, we vote for politicians who are then, in theory, supposed to represent our interests. But how representational democracy should work in theory is not how it works in practice. In almost all democratic countries, a small number of political candidates are pre-selected by a handful of political parties that monopolize each country's political system, and from these candidates we vote for the ones we prefer, or at least dislike the least. Once elected, far from being forced to represent the interests of the majority, politicians can, and frequently do, serve their own interests. Or as Frank Karsten and Carol Beckman note in their book Beyond Democracy, it is not the will of the people, but the will of politicians, prompted by groups of professional lobbyists, interest groups, and activists, that reigns in a democracy. Many will counter that a benefit of an indirect democracy is that we can vote out the corrupt politicians who fail to serve us. The problem, however, is that modern democracies rarely produce honest and ethical political candidates. Each time one corrupt politician is voted out of office, he or she is replaced by another corrupt politician who merely serves different special interest groups. Furthermore, nation-states have grown so large that most of the state actors who rule over us and implement the policies that affect us on a day-to-day basis are bureaucrats who are not subject to popular elections. And herein lies perhaps the most serious flaw of modern democracies. The democratic process seems incapable of preventing the worst from rising to the top in government. There are several factors that can account for this. Firstly, there is the corrupting nature of power. Unlimited power in the hands of limited people always leads to cruelty, said Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Or as Mikhail Bakunin wrote, however democratic may be their feelings and their intentions, once politicians achieve the elevation of office, they can only view society in the same ways a schoolmaster views his pupils. And between pupils and masters, equality cannot exist. On one side, there is the feeling of a superiority that is inevitably provoked by a position of superiority. On the other side, there is the sense of inferiority which follows from the superiority of the teacher. Whoever talks of political power talks of domination, but where domination exists, there is inevitably a somewhat large section of society that is dominated. This is the eternal history of political power. Another factor that can account for the moral corruption of politicians is that, like a moth to a flame, the most ruthless and power-hungry among us are attracted to state power. Those who enter the game of politics are often the very individuals who we least want to rule over us. Or as Frank Herbert wrote, all governments suffer a recurring problem. Power attracts pathological personalities. It is not that power corrupts, but that it is magnetic to the corruptible. Another explanation for why the worst rise to the top in modern politics is because Machiavellian, narcissistic, and sociopathic character traits improve one's chance of winning a political election or getting promoted to the position of a high-level bureaucrat. Or as the philosopher Hans Hermann Hoppe explains, The selection of state rulers by means of popular elections makes it essentially impossible for harmless or decent persons to ever rise to the top. Presidents and prime ministers come into their position not owing to their status as natural aristocrats, as feudal kings once did, but as a result of their capacity as morally uninhibited demagogues. Hence, democracy virtually assures that only dangerous men will rise to the top of state government. Once in power, these demagogues are effectively shielded from the wrath of the citizenry due to a mirage that is created by the dogma of democracy. Most people believe that in a democracy, it is we the people that rule, and that as rulers we are collectively to blame for the corruption, ineptitude, and immorality of our government. This belief overlooks the fact that most of us have no impact on the actions of politicians, and it diverts responsibility away from the politicians and bureaucrats who are responsible for the policies that are destroying society. Furthermore, when it is believed that we the people rule, our resistance toward the dangerous growth of state power is weakened, or as Hoppe explains, under democracy the distinction between the rulers and the ruled becomes blurred. The illusion even arises that the distinction no longer exists, that with democratic government no one is ruled by anyone, but everyone instead rules himself. Accordingly, public resistance against government power is systematically weakened. Weakened resistance to the growth of state power has created a fertile ground for the emergence of totalitarian rule across the West. Many will counter that the democratic West is not at all like the totalitarian countries of the past, be it Soviet Russia, Communist China, Nazi Germany, Cuba, or North Korea. These countries centralized power and controlled the lives of their citizens to a degree never seen in history and to a level which far exceeds the experience of the modern West. But the centralization of government power in Western democracies differs only in degree to that seen in the totalitarian countries of the 20th century. Western democracies are what can be called soft totalitarian states, in contrast to the more brutal manifestations of totalitarianism past. In 1835, Alexis de Tocqueville foresaw the rise of soft totalitarianism in Western democracies and described it in his great work, Democracy in America. After having taken each individual one by one into its powerful hands and having molded him as it pleases, the sovereign power extends its arms over the entire society. It covers the surface of society with a network of small, complicated, minute, and uniform rules, which the most original minds and the most vigorous souls cannot break through to go beyond the crowd. It does not break wills, but it softens them, bends them, and directs them. It rarely forces action, but it constantly opposes your acting. It hinders, it represses, it enervates, it extinguishes, it stupefies. And finally, it reduces each nation to being nothing more than a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which the government is the shepherd. Prior to the rise of this soft totalitarianism, social relations were structured by a multiplicity of different institutions and associations which were independent of government, such as markets, guilds, churches, private hospitals, universities, fraternities, charities, monasteries, and most importantly, the primal community of the family. These independent associations and institutions, while providing great societal benefits, also acted as barriers to the expansion of government power. The destruction and replacement of these more diverse forms of community with relationships between the individual and the state, which began in the West in the 20th century and continues to this day, was a crucial step in the rise of governments who hide their totalitarian nature behind the veil of the democratic ideal, or as Robert Nisbet wrote in The Quest for Community, "It is not the extermination of individuals that is ultimately desired by totalitarian rulers. What is desired is the extermination of those social relationships which, by their autonomous existence, must always constitute a barrier to the achievement of the absolute political community." The prime object of totalitarian government thus becomes the incessant destruction of all evidence of spontaneous, autonomous association, to destroy or diminish the reality of the smaller areas of society, to abolish or restrict the range of cultural alternatives offered to individuals, is to destroy, in time, the roots of the will to resist despotism in its large forms. In places like Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, the destruction of institutions independent of the state was done quite rapidly and with the use of violence. The same process has been occurring in Western democracies, but at a slower pace, and instead of violence, these alternative institutions are crippled with the use of propaganda, educational indoctrination, laws, regulations, and bureaucratic red tape. But no matter how totalitarianism emerges, the result is always the same. Citizens become subjects, the state becomes the master, and even if we are still granted the right to vote, we are enslaved nonetheless. Or as Lysander Spooner wrote, "A man is nonetheless a slave because he is allowed to choose a new master once in a term of years." If our democracies cannot prevent the worst from rising to the top, and if they cannot protect us from the rise of a soft totalitarianism, then democracy, as currently practiced, is a failed institution, and alternative forms of political organization must be explored and openly debated. Some may continue to hold out hope that a political savior will emerge, overcome all the corrupting influences of the state, and return society to a path of peace and prosperity. This, however, is to gamble with the future of society. For as we wait for our savior, who may never emerge, the state will continue to grow more and more burdensome, and then slowly at first, but ever more rapidly, our societies will deteriorate into the hellish conditions that characterize all totalitarian nations. For as James Kolb noted, if all social order becomes dependent on the administrative state, when that becomes terminally corrupt and non-functional, everything goes. If you would like to support Academy of Ideas, consider joining our membership program and access over 88 videos exclusive to members. Examples of membership videos include the psychology of rapid personality change, how sociological propaganda is being used to shape society, how creativity can help cure depression, a 3-part course on the evolutionary psychology of sex and relationships, and a 2-part series on the corruption of mainstream science. Our membership program is less than $5 a month on an annual membership and $6 a month on a monthly membership. To join, visit academyofideas.com/members.
Watch out, don't fucking fuck with that, it's gonna fall. Put that in the room too, look. That's a good spring.
That's a cat's toy.
The self-hating black, here we go. I love being black, nigga. I just look like nigga.
I actually duetted another video, and I was like, I'm gonna leave this fool alone. It was about how I'm guessing, just from the 3-second stitch I had done in the video I was gonna duet or stitch, which said something along the lines of, I just tell black people the truth, and if black people don't like it, fuck them. And I was like, that's real problematic because the black community has never really had a hard time accepting truth. We live that shit. It's the other communities that largely experience cognitive dissonance with faced with truth that contradicts with their bullshit worldview and narratives. But then I was like, fuck it, ain't worth my time. But let me go ahead because I'm curious to see if I was right. Is this person a supremacist currently? Because I went to their account and right from the bat, they are a person who has served supremacy and has been proud to do it. So I go to their first pin video, not much there, or, you know, a raccoon. And people do this, especially in the black community. They falsely accuse people of being raccoons simply because they speak well. And a myriad of other reasons that does not make someone a raccoon. However, serving YT supremacy, not knowing that you're serving YT supremacy, not caring that you're serving YT supremacy, not thinking that it's YT supremacy, is problematic as fuck. So I stitched this video. If you go back and watch this video, this fool's basically saying that He loves being black because of all the wonderful reasons someone would like being black or love being black. But he doesn't like black people, essentially. He said the other word, which I'm not going to do. I have done and do, but not in this context. I'm not going to feed into his lingo. But when you watch this video, he goes on to say that he wants people and black people to progress to heights never seen before within the framework of America. Number one, this is the United States. I'm pretty sure he didn't say the United States. I'm pretty sure he said America, like the United States is like the pinnacle or the archetypal, stereotypical image of America, but it's just one part of the Americas. It's literally called the United States. So it's just, and then he goes on to say, if they don't like it, they can leave. If anybody doesn't like that, they can get the fuck out. They'll pack them some tickets. Y'all been saying that for years. I ain't provided no goddamn tickets, no passports, nothing. Number one. But number two, y'all don't own this fucking place. So you buy into the YT supremacy rhetoric that y'all own this fucking place, and you don't. So you're bro, I might make a little case study out of you. Because, and then he goes on to say that he has a lot of support, not really on TikTok, but offline. Can anyone guess where his support's primarily coming from? Can anyone guess? I'm just gonna guess. I might be wrong. I did a lot of this in the other video, which is why I didn't post it. Guessing, assuming that his offline support largely comes from a certain demographic. Just gonna say. And of course, frame of reference for largely moving forward, we're seeing that people have lost touch with the idea that this way of life is not the objective standard for reality, socioeconomic systems, living on a planet, living in societies, living in civilization. But they talk about it as if his future framework, the future he has in his mind, only includes the United States government doing what it does, people doing what they do, and like you said, within the framework of the America or whatever fuck, but within the framework of supremacy is essentially what they're talking about. So you want, and I agree, no people should be unaliving each other. We can agree on that one. So I don't think black people should be unaliving each other. I don't think, I know that the black community largely, especially if you're going to make it a monolith, is not playing victim about anything. If you go to a psychiatrist about anything, they talk about the history of the thing. If that thing is you, then they talk about your past, which is history, your history, and how it affects you today, and how it affects the people around you today, especially when those people are the culprits of whatever you're talking about. That's not victim mentality. So I can pick you apart, but it's going to take longer than right now. So please, by all means, reply to this video, refute what I'm saying about this or that. Go ahead. Include how you don't support YT supremacy with your anti-blackness, or talk about how you're not being anti-black by being a white supremacist. Because that's essentially what's going on. Because I believe you. You love being black. Why wouldn't you? But as you so eloquently stated, you don't like black people. And that's fine. That's fine. For you. But to speak as you're speaking, as if it's objective, as if you are right, as if you're telling the truth, is absurd. Sit the fuck down before I eat your face. Eat your face, Hannibal Lecter style.
I was on Evolving Seeds because Evolving Seeds is doing incredible things. I'm going to have them tagged below. We're talking about mutual aid if you want to support people, or if you need support, if you want to be part of the progress moving forward to solve some of the world's really crazy humanities issues. Check Evolving Seeds out. I'm going to have him tagged. But he was had a background of whatonearthishappening.com. So I went there and this is what I found. And it's 111 right now. I have published my first book, Astrology Meets Numerology, and I've really been thinking of ways that I can also contribute and help the community, and I've considered doing a lot of donations from